We will take questions all together after all the speakers. So go ahead and introduce our next speaker, Eden Brukman, the Senior Green Building Coordinator with the San Francisco Department of the Environment. So Eden, go ahead and share your screen when you are ready with your presentation.
All right, hopefully you can see my screen and you can hear me all right?
Yep.
Great. It's wonderful to be here with all of you. Thanks to the organizers of today's regional forum for the invitation. I've been asked to share a bit about San Francisco's process to electrify municipal buildings, in particular our experience with the Municipal Existing Buildings Work Group as part of the Mayor's Zero Emission Building Task Force. There's a lot to touch on in the next 10 minutes, so let's just jump in. If I can forward, there we go. For context, it's helpful to be reminded of the current emission sources in San Francisco. Buildings are responsible for 44% of emissions, primarily due to the use of natural gas for space conditioning and water heating. For our municipal building stock, almost all emissions are due to natural gas. We are fortunate that we have electricity supplied by Hetch Hetchy Power, which is 100% GHG free. The Department of the Environment has also been exploring the potential to electrify buildings for several years, and we've published some in-depth reports in 2016 to inform policy action. In 2018, at the Global Climate Action Summit that was held in San Francisco and hosted by then California Governor Jerry Brown, San Francisco was among 28 global cities that signed on to the Net Zero Carbon Buildings Declaration, organized by C40 and the World Green Building Council. This is a commitment for all new construction to be zero emissions in operation no later than 2030, and for all buildings to have zero operational emissions by 2050. A few months later, in March 2019, the San Francisco Board of Supervisors passed a resolution declaring a climate emergency in San Francisco. And in response, the Department of the Environment published Focus 2030, a pathway to net zero emissions in July 2019. This included 3 key areas for buildings: all electric new construction and fuel switching in existing buildings, energy efficiency, and 100% clean and renewable power. We've made some strides with policy to this end. Effective January 1st of this year, new construction and whole building major renovations of municipal buildings must be all electric. Several projects in design and construction already plan to be all electric, like the Southeast Community Center pictured here. For private development, there's a complementary ordinance that went into effect mid-February, and that favors all electric buildings. So if a project includes natural gas, it's subject to increased energy efficiency measures too. It's not surprising that there are private developments also already underway that are all electric. The Maceo May Apartments, pictured here, is now under construction, and it's one of several affordable housing projects in San Francisco that is all electric. It features more than 100 new homes for homeless and formerly homeless veterans. So now we're working on next steps. Mayor London Breed directed the Department of the Environment to convene a zero emission building task force, which commenced in November. The task force is a public-private collaboration with work groups that have met throughout the first half of this year to provide recommendations for decarbonization of existing municipal, commercial, and residential buildings. Under Supervisor Mandelman, a 4th work group met and has since drafted a regulation for the elimination of natural gas from private new construction. And this was just approved by DBI's Code Advisory Committee and is advancing to the BIC. We'll be integrating findings from all the work groups into the next iteration of our climate action plan, which is planned for later this year. And policies impacting municipal projects will be incorporated into the Environment Code Chapter 7, which includes green building requirements for municipal buildings beyond the San Francisco Green Building Code. So looking deeper at the existing municipal buildings work group, We had participation from 13 departments and divisions, selected either because of their specific roles and responsibilities related to building funding, design, construction, and operations, or because of their current efforts underway to electrify existing buildings in their portfolio. The meetings aimed for participants to share their specific expertise, and then we also brought in some outside guests, including facilitation by Ember Strategies to maximize knowledge transfer. We originally designed 5 in-person meetings with some homework in between, but of course our calendar shifted with the Safer at Home order, and I'll touch on that a bit more in a moment. To set the stage, we considered various approaches to interventions and their impacts, such as the rate of change and degree of mandatory measures, as well as the resulting pathways to zero carbon. Ideally, we want to avoid that difficult intervention, which tends to be the result of slower and more voluntary movement, and instead be someplace between that steady progress and proactive empowerment area. Early on, the group brainstormed different ways to catalog and evaluate our existing building stock. We talked about how small and contained maintenance efforts are ideal for end-of-life equipment replacement, and how large comprehensive alterations present an excellent opportunity for redesign. But then there's everything in between, which will need some specific solutions that potentially can be difficult. So part of our brainstorm included indicators and metrics to prioritize these more elusive and challenging buildings. We also spent some time discussing the steps in the current process and sharing different ways that each agency responds once a department identifies a need. We walked through the timing for feasibility studies, funding conversations, and commitments, design, construction, and operations. It's a pretty typical flow. But by mapping the system, we were then able to come up with ways that each step would be changed to include considerations for fuel switching. Though it wasn't part of the initial discussion, we ultimately added a step 0 there at the front to include the creation of a basis for action that would inform all of the future steps. When the Safer at Home order came into effect in March, we were right in the middle of our meeting schedule. And with so many of our participants reassigned as disaster service workers or responding in some other way to the coronavirus pandemic, we pivoted some of our in-person meetings to independent worksheets and RFIs, or requests for information. So this allowed us some flexibility for people to still participate. Responses were compiled and then discussed at our final meeting that was held virtually in May. And then since then, we've continued to meet informally with representatives from the work group, as well as other department staff. One key area that we used the RFI to flesh out was the empowerment and education. We asked folks to list in their department who is driving outcomes for fuel switching and what information would benefit them. Some suggestions on that topic range from the more didactic policy and goal language, trainings, resource libraries, and then there was the introduction of new methods of collaboration, such as the facility maintenance roundtable, an advisory group that may be an offshoot of the Municipal Green Building Taskforce already in effect, and then a dedicated citywide fund for retrofits. These tools were then further outlined based on the various roles that staff would be playing in fuel switching. We saw quite a bit of overlap among the different departments, and so we grouped the tools into 5 categories. Those for leadership, asset managers, engineers and designers, maintenance staff, and then utilities. Finally, we compiled some cross-cutting themes to inform the zero emission building roadmap, together with findings from each work group. So I'll touch on the overarching themes first, and then we'll run through the findings from the Municipal Existing Buildings work group. The 4 cross-cutting themes, as you can see here, are clarity and commitment. The finding is we must communicate about the future and eliminate barriers to action if we want to be effective. Time and timing, anticipation, planning, and resources are required. Value and values, electrification brings health, resilience, and decarbonization benefits. And then finally, the 4th is 49 square miles. And we need a decarbonization master plan that includes every neighborhood. You'll see we also included some fine print to offer some additional clarification or acknowledge some of the complexities that are associated with these themes. As for the Municipal Existing Buildings work group, the following 5 items highlight the needs and action items. The first one, know the portfolio. acknowledges that information about municipal buildings is available and needs to be integrated to inform project selection. The way that we organize this data can help shape content of proposals to ensure electrification options are considered. Next, be strategic and opportunistic. This is really about aligning departments and collaborating to have the training, resources, feedback loops, and ability to learn and succeed together to fulfill the city's zero emission commitments. Third, seek the highest value, including co-benefits. This is a reminder that choices should be filtered through a triple bottom line accounting so that economic, health, and resilience impacts of public investments are considered and are as important as technology selection. Another aspect of this is that we need to shift away from a mindset of like for like equipment replacement, which may not truly meet our expectations. Fourth is evolve the funding model. As I showed earlier, we had iterative conversations about funding constraints and the need for creative solutions through all project stages, from scoping and feasibility to funding and optimizing, and finally implementation. The work group emphasized that it would be useful to have a structure for proposals to include the cost of inaction and the total cost of ownership for more informed funding decisions. And finally, pursue a geographic approach. As you saw from the overarching themes, this idea surfaced in all the other work groups too. So there are many benefits in taking a holistic approach and in designing an orderly transition for fuel switching. For the municipal work group, it also means that we can build on coordination between utilities and the private sector. The group underscored the need to engage with the utilities early and often for this to be successful.
You have just a minute left. Thank you.
So that's just a bit about the Municipal Existing Buildings Work Group. It's worth noting that we do have examples of fuel switching already happening too. This image is of the Mission Branch Library, which is also a historic Carnegie library that is undergoing significant renovation and will be all electric when complete. You can find more information about the Zero Emission Building Task Force and other workgroup activities on our website at sfenvironment.org/ZEB Task Force. And you can contact me with any questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Eden. That was great information about the task force and San Francisco's efforts.